I mean, we're talking about SASE today. It's a relatively new term. There's not that many people out there that understand what it is yet.
These are suites that we're talking about, whether it's single vendor or multi-vendor.
Yeah.
They're suites that contain multiple components. So before you know which components that you need, the gaps that you're trying to fill, it's difficult to answer that.
I always used to work on the 80-20 rule, where if it delivered 80% of what I needed from the tool, then buy it from the single vendor. If it didn't, go best in breed.
So guys, we've surveyed 700 organisations globally, 250 in the UK. We're going to concentrate on the UK for this this kind of little talk. Few things that have come out of this report that are really interesting. First one is that from the respondents, more than 99% of the respondents have been attacked in the last year. So what are our thoughts on that, first of all?
Would you like to check it?
Yeah, sure. Not surprised, to be honest. It is very rife out there. And that really, I guess, shows how important having a secure posture is. And especially, we're talking about SASE today, and how that can help mitigate the impact from those attacks, because they're always coming. I think the move to AI has made it easier to firstly to do the social engineering to get hold of credentials, and then when you have hold of the credentials, to then impersonate in a way that you could never impersonate in the past, and that's making it very difficult to keep things secure.
Yeah. Jaye, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised either. 99%. I mean, that just means 1% haven't figured out they've been compromised yet.
Yeah.
I think it's very different than we would have had a few years ago. I think people were less aware of the fact that they may have been breached. I think so. We're making progress. At least we know today. I think it also raises a good point around being prepared.
Yeah.
So yes, we have to do as much as we can to keep people out, but we also need to be prepared if people get in. What do we do next? How do we recover? How do we back up and restore? All of those kind of things. It raises those things as well. But it does, I don't want to say it's a good thing that 99% of people have been compromised, but it's a good thing that they at least know, right? Yeah. So that's a step forward.
I guess the difficult thing with all of this is that, I guess, it seems odd that people have been attacked. They know they're going to get attacked again. You would extrapolate from that. But the challenge always with security is you can't have everything. You can't protect everything in the way that maybe you would like, because you've got budget that you've got to consider in this. And I guess that's part of the problem as well for organisations.
Yeah, I think it for me, it's one of those things when I have these conversations with people, it's about understanding how critical your data is. What are your crown jewels? Now, yes, the people have acknowledged they've been compromised, but what was the outcome of that?
Yeah.
What was data stolen? Was it ransomware? Those kind of things. And how critical was that? I mean, I think we're learning now to be able to put protection around those critical assets. And some of the other things maybe don't matter as much.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they don't matter.
Yeah.
But if you only have a limited budget, protect those critical assets as important. It's a bit like, we have CCTV on our video tools in our houses and alarm systems. Maybe we don't care so much about our gardens.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe we lock our sheds as well. So it's about putting protection around the things that are important.
Yeah. Till you get your plants stolen, right?
Yeah.
No, I think that's good feedback, because I think we all realise that is the challenge is that classification to start with, probably making sure you understand what are the important assets to you and then protecting them kind of appropriately. Okay, cool. Another thing that came out that was really clear, which I think this has been going on in the industry for a long time now, is this whole challenge with resource around security, right? If you're lucky enough to get some good resource, you've got to keep them trained. You've got to, make sure that they're aware of the threat landscape changing, that they've got the tools they need, etc. But how do you see that challenge in the industry? Because it's clearly one that I see day after day with organisations not able to retain that good resource to help them with this.
I like to go back to when I first started my career, like before the internet, before mobile phones. We had the luxury, I would say, of learning technology as they evolved. So there was no virtualization. There was really no LAN. There was no WAN. Email was very basic. We managed to learn as we went through our careers, and we had that foundation we could build on. People trying to enter the industry today, it's constantly changing, but it's also, there's a significant amount of difference. We talk about cyber, but it's not one area. You have multiple different things within the cyber arena. You may be a pen tester, you may be a red teamer, you may work in a SOC, you may work on a support desk. But it's hard to break in when businesses are just trying to hire everything in one go. And I think there's a little bit of naivety in when people are trying to hire. I've read job specifications. It really should be 6 or 7 different people. It's quite often that the security team is quite a small number of people compared to, say, the infrastructure or the IT team. And I think there's an offset there. So we could talk about this particular topic for hours on itself, because there is a retention problem. There's a hiring problem. There's a skill set problem. There doesn't appear to be a lack of people trying to break in.
Yeah.
So really the question is, if we've got all these people trying to break into the industry, what is holding people back training them? I had the luxury of being trained, as I said, over the years. I think the difficulty is, as we just talked about, businesses are being compromised. CISOs can actually can go to jail if their businesses get compromised. There's that whole debate around that. Therefore, the industry is particularly difficult and stressful to work in. And therefore, businesses are trying to hire, I guess, top tier talent because you are protecting your environment.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before, that if an email server went down 10 years ago, it was like, fine, it can be down for a day. If a file server went down or access to certain things went down, it wasn't business critical. It's not the same in cyber. If you get compromised, it's business critical. You have to deal with it. So I think there's that kind of balance between, we need high level talent because we're fighting against the bad people here, but we need to be able to train them as well. And it's a constantly moving environment.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about SASE today. It's a relatively new term. There's not that many people out there that understand what it is yet.
Yeah.
Still. So that's that balance.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I think like most skills where there's a shortage, you get a lot of people specializing very quickly in that shortage, but they may not have the breadth. They may not have worked on a support desk in the past. They may not have the context of what the bigger picture looks like. They're focusing on that security piece, and therefore they may be as proficient as they otherwise could be.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem.
We saw in the report as well, actually, maybe this plays into this a little bit, 42% of people said they were having trouble detecting threats. Now that's interesting because when you look at all the tooling that is now available to everybody, I guess as I'm saying it to myself, it's at 42%. Is that a people problem, or is that tooling problem, or is it an information overload? What are the thoughts on that? Because I know, for instance, post-COVID or during COVID, a lot of these tools were deployed because people felt, as they moved to this world where people were, needing to access, resources remotely, right? Like, we need to protect this, we need to put these tools in, but it's throwing maybe a lot of information at them, but it's maybe not that easy to understand what's the valuable information. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
I think, again, there's no simple answer to this. Definitely what I hear when I'm in the field is people want to reduce complexity and make things simpler. Yeah. And I think we have many, many tools. I think upwards of 75 plus tools is on average what a CISO or a CIO has to manage. If you have all those tools, there are going to be gaps between those tools, dark places where people can hide. So there's an element of being able to trace where there might be a problem, or being able to get visibility. Yeah. And we're talking about SASE today, and SASE is really all about simplification, consolidation, and bringing things under one roof and giving greater visibility. Because we lack that visibility, I think When we were in the old castle in moat design, where all of our users and applications and data was on-prem, we had a lot of tools, probably still too many, but we had a wider range of tools that could give us full visibility. Pandemic came along, we've got IoT and OT, we've got cloud, data users and applications are now everywhere. So therefore you have visibility into your cloud tools, you have visibility into some of your remote users, not so much over VPN, but with the ZTNA tool you do. But they're all in different tools. You have all these different layers of visibility, and therefore you have those gaps. And that creates a problem in itself. Because if you have gaps, that's exactly where people are going to hide, right?
Yeah, 100% makes sense. And what about you? What do you see, Stephen?
I guess I agree that there's gaps. But I think we do have quite good visibility, but what we have is alert fatigue. So we've got all of these tools out there, each generating the own information, and people just don't have enough time to process that information. So it might be that forensically, when you go back after an event, that it's obvious what happened. The problem is we're not seeing that at the time of the event. And that's what we need to focus on. It's beyond people being able to process all that information. So you need some of the newer tools to be able to trawl through that. The other thing is any security system is not set and forget. It has to be fed and watered. So you should be constantly reducing that alert fatigue. So going through and adjusting your policies to make sure that what's important you're being drawn to and has your attention. So that you can be detecting things rather than forensically looking at them afterwards.
No, that all makes sense. And a couple of things that were interesting there, I think. One for me is the simplicity, right? I think this is it's a cornerstone of cybersecurity, really, isn't it? The simpler you can make things, the more easy it is to understand, the better you can control it, manage it, understand it, etc. So two things there. The simplicity keeps coming up actually in conversations we're having with customers. Came up at our summit event last week, actually. On that, the other thing that we talked about in the report a little bit, or asked people about, is single vendor SASE, multi-vendor SASE. And there's possibly a simplicity question around that. What are your thoughts on that, Stephen, in terms of that single vendor route or multi-vendor route, and maybe related to simplicity?
I wouldn't be looking at that as my first criteria to choose something. I'd be looking at what is it I'm trying to solve for. And then making selections based on what I'm trying to solve for. These are suites that we're talking about, whether it's single vendor or multi-vendor. They're suites that contain multiple components. So before you know which components that you need, the gaps that you're trying to fill, it's difficult to answer that question. However, if you can get anything from a single vendor, it kind of makes the most sense, because then you're not having multiple portals to have to control everything. But as I said, it's that would be a choice I'd make after I know what it is I'm trying to solve for.
I think that's very valid. I think buying from a single vendor that actually has 6 or 7 different tools is not the same as buying from a single vendor that has one single user interface, one single tool. They're different. There's still a benefit, I think, in buying from a single vendor, because you have the cost benefits and all of those other things, but you haven't necessarily reduced the complexity. All you've done is bought 5 tools from the same vendor. What is important is to buy a single tool, because that's where simplification comes in. That's where consolidation comes in. So I would always try in the past, when I was on the other side of the fence, to reduce the number of tools I had in play, to reduce those gaps that people could hide into, and to add simplification. And I don't mean simplification just for IT and security, because that is critical as well for people managing these tools and be able to administrate and access them in visibility. But you need simplicity for the users as well, because we all know if it's difficult for a user to use, they'll find another way. Right. And that other way usually is not within the corporate guidelines or whatever it might be. So you want it to be simple from a UI point of view, to administrate, to give visibility across a wider range of what used to be point products, but it needs to be easy for the users to use as well. But I would always aim for a single vendor, a single tool if possible. And I would do the same as what you would do. Mark up, what is it I actually need?
Yeah.
I always used to work on the 80-20 rule, where if it delivered 80% of what I needed from the tool, then buy it from a single vendor.
Yeah.
If it didn't, go best in breed.
Yeah.
And I think over the years, that's become easier because vendors don't just have one thing they're very, very good at and everything else they're kind of good at. They're beginning to be good at more things.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think the single vendor approach is something that people start with and only buy outside of that if it doesn't fit their need.
Yeah.
I think this is what people should do.
Yeah.
I think it's quite common in IT that you'll take that 20% of corner cases and you'll compromise your design just to fit those corner cases. So I think you're right. Hit the 80%, ideally with that single vendor, and then maybe add on to get those corner cases, but don't compromise your design for those corner cases.
And I'd like to be a little bit controversial as well and say that we like new toys, right? Deep down, I'm a nerd, I'm a geek. We like new toys. So therefore, we would want something new. We would want the next cool thing. We would want to be able to play with that new toy.
Yeah.
And therefore, if it's part of a single interface and stuff, it's maybe not as exciting. There's that fatigue as well of we want change, and it shouldn't just have change for change's sake. You want to try and when we've talked a bit about resourcing as well. If you have less tools in play and they're simpler to use, you don't have to train people so much. There's that element of not having 50 tools means you don't need all these different skill sets. So there's all kinds of things mixed into that bag, right?
Yeah. Okay. One thing that I think shocked me a little bit in this report was the kind of what looks like a slow uptake on ZTNA. You know, we've talked about the different elements of kind of SASE and some of these kind of different ways of running your cyber and your access and what have you. That to me seems kind of really odd, because I think we all see the challenge in the security around VPNs and the potential risk around VPNs. So what are your thoughts on that aspect?
VPN is something, the risk of VPN is something I talk about a lot. I mean, it's not something that is a secret anymore.
Yeah.
We see it on social media. It's on the news. We see that these kind of legacy VPN tools are being compromised, and not only directly through the front door because they've not been patched, but also VPNs put people on the network. So you can hide in that VPN tunnel, and because you've got that lack of visibility, people go all over your network. We were speaking about it over breakfast this morning, and it's one of those things where, although I just said people like change, they don't want responsibility in some cases.
Yeah.
Right. I think if a tool's been implemented by somebody else, you don't necessarily need to concern yourself or want to concern yourself with it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you decide that you want to replace that tool with something new, you own that new thing.
Yeah.
And ZTNA is relatively new. It's about connecting users and devices just to applications, which is not the way we've done things. Legacy VPNs connect clients to everything on the network.
Yeah.
So there's an element of having to understand what the users need access to from what devices. That's not a zero trust mechanism if you do VPN, but ZTNA is around connecting users just to applications. But if you've had your VPN in play for many, many years, you may not know what the users are accessing.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that concern around, it's a relatively new tool, it's a relatively new concept, and it's completely the other side of the coin, as well as if I implement this, I have to own it.
Yeah. So there's fear from moving itself. If there is a problem there, you've caused it by.
Yeah. So I think people evaluate the risk and start to consider maybe we'll be okay with the VPN, versus I'm going to be responsible for a new tool that maybe back to training and resources that maybe we don't have the knowledge of how to deal with it.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because what we're saying almost now is we know people are a big risk when it comes to cyber, You know, it's often not the technology, it's the people that are the problem. And it looks like maybe even in the decision makers in the business, we've got a problem, and it's just, I guess, basic psychology, really. Yeah. So we've discussed a few of the problems that are within this report. The report obviously goes into a lot more detail, but if we look at all these things we've talked about this morning, how can SASE help then? Let's put this into perspective for people watching this. How can they help themselves through a move to SASE?
I think the biggest way it helps is the topologies evolved to better suit today's environment. So in the past, where your apps were centralized, your users were sitting in branches, that required a specific topology that just doesn't scale to what we need today. So having that distributed edge, but having the central control over that distributed edge, is a massive shift in the right direction to properly address, I guess, today's workforce.
Yeah. Anything from you on that, Jaye?
Yeah, I mean, the term's evolving as well. So SASE is now evolving into what we refer to as universal ZTNA. So if you look at the SASE architecture, it doesn't include on-prem, because it was designed and developed really during the pandemic when there were less people on-prem. So it lacks things like network access control and microsegmentation. So it's evolving to be able to protect the users when they're in an office as well in this hybrid world. But I think the key thing about SASE is don't need to implement it all at once. If VPN is your biggest risk and deem your biggest risk, start there. If you need better performance, better network, better connectivity, start with SD-WAN. If you have both of those problems, you can do them in conjunction. It's a bit like going to a buffet restaurant. You don't need, I mean, I would eat everything on the buffet because that's me, but you don't have to. Right? You can take bit by bit. And one of the questions I often get asked is, where should I start?
Yeah.
And I asked John Kindervag this years ago about a zero trust project, like, where should you start? And his answer was, it's not important where you start, it's important that you start.
Well, yeah, good point.
Because we were talking again earlier on today that a company that I've been doing some work with was compromised with ransomware.
Yeah.
5 months later, they were compromised by the same ransomware, by the same organization.
Same weakness, same vulnerability.
Because they hadn't done anything. So I think what is critical and what I want everybody to understand is you just need to start.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you will get compromised.
Yeah, and it is a worry for people. We do a lot of advisory, as you know, and what we see a lot of the time is that we have to guide in terms of, where people start. But you're absolutely right. The key thing is to start.
Yeah, and these are relatively new terms. I mean, we talk about SASE, but it's only really 2019 and then re-evolved in 2021 when they added the SASE element. Universal ZTNA is a pretty much unknown term right now. So when I ask people, when I present, do you know what SASE is? I get a big raise of hands now, which a year ago I wouldn't have got. But when I ask them, raise your hand if you understand what the business value is, almost no one puts their hands up. So they know the term, but they don't necessarily know how it's going to make their business more efficient, how it's going to protect them, how they can offset the costs, what's the return on investment, all of those kind of things. And I think that's where people like yourselves can come in and do that advisory.
Yeah.
So I think it's starting now, it's gathering pace, and I'd like to see you guys do another survey in a year to see what's changed.
Yeah, no, it'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it? Well, just before we kind of wrap up then, any kind of closing remarks that we would like to make, Stephen?
The only one I would say is SASE is a technical solution, but it requires a lot of planning up front because it is a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So replacing a VPN solution with a VPN solution is quite easy. It's a technical project. Replacing it with a ZTNA solution requires a lot of categorization to be done at the very start.
Yeah.
Requires dynamic policies, things we haven't had in the past. So I think you can't underestimate that kind of planning phase in moving from one paradigm to another.
I think that's the critical thing. This is a cultural shift in the way we've done things. ZTNA, Zero Trust, is very different. It's completely the opposite way. We used to give everyone access to everything because it was efficient and simple and was good for user experience. Yeah. But we've learned that opens up for ransomware and insider threat and all those kind of things. So this is not an IT project.
Yeah.
This is a business imperative that we need to make a cultural shift, because if we don't make this shift, then we're never going to get these things under control.
So I completely agree on the fact that this is as much a business project as it is an IT project. And I think one important thing to point out there is having identity systems very, very tightly integrated with this SASE project is of utmost importance. As much as we need to categorize the resources we're connecting to, we need to know who's connecting to them. And we need to be building all of our policies dynamically around that user base and the resources that we're connecting to. So you really need to look at what foundation you have today from an identity perspective, and how well is that integrate, and is there any remediation you need to do on that side as part of your SASE?
Yeah, identity is the new.
I think that's a good point.
It's the line, isn't it, that we're seeing.
For sure.
Great. Well, great. Thanks very much for your time. As always, really interesting chat. I think as we get feedback on the report from people, I think there might be more for us to talk about and hopefully do this again. See you again.